I choose her to be Mom." The boy's small voice echoed through the golden hall of the Collins mansion, slicing through the silence sharper than any verdict. No one moved, no one breathed, for in that single choice, 8-year-old Ethan Collins had decided the fate of his family's future. On that brisk autumn morning, the Collins mansion gleamed beneath the New York sun, its tall windows catching every shard of golden light. It stood proud and beautiful, yet an air of loneliness clung to its walls. In the wide kitchen, Emma Rivera bent over the polished wooden dining table, her cloth gliding carefully across its surface. At only 23, she carried herself with the quiet discipline of someone who had learned to move without drawing attention. 4 months into her work as the family housekeeper, Emma had memorized every habit, every routine, every unspoken rule of this home. What she had not expected was the bond that had grown between her and the mansion's most vulnerable heart. Ethan Collins, the 8-year-old boy whose eyes carried the heavy shadow of losing his mother. From the first moment Emma met Ethan, she sensed his loneliness. He would drift into the kitchen with folded paper drawings in his hands, asking her questions about everything from stars to stories, testing if she would listen. She always did. When he smiled, rare but genuine, it was like sunlight breaking through clouds that had hung too long over the Collins estate. His father, Richard Collins, was a man used to command. A powerful businessman with influence across Manhattan, he had buried himself in corporate battles after the sudden passing of his wife 8 months earlier. Yet for all his victories in boardrooms, Richard could not win the silence that now filled his son's voice. Ethan was pulling inward, retreating from the world. And Richard, desperate and guilt-ridden, convinced himself the boy needed what work and wealth could not give: a mother's presence. That conviction led Richard to make a decision that bordered on the extraordinary. He invited 5 wealthy women, each carefully chosen from New York's upper circles, to stay in his mansion for 30 days. At the end, Ethan would choose which one of them would become his new mother. To Richard, it seemed a plan of reason. To Emma, watching from the edges of the family she served, it felt like an approaching storm. She was a maid, nothing more. The kind of woman no one in this house would consider part of its story. And yet, when she thought of Ethan, of the simple meals they shared in the kitchen, of the paper cranes she folded to quiet his restless hands, her heart clenched at the thought of him being asked to hand his trust to a stranger. Engines growled outside, and Emma looked up. Through the tall front windows, she watched 5 luxury cars roll into the driveway, their polished hoods catching the sun like mirrors. One by one, the doors opened. The women stepped out not merely as guests, but as competitors, each choreographed to impress. First was Sofia Delgado, a Manhattan lawyer whose navy dress seemed as crisp as her reputation. Her steps were sharp, her eyes calculating, her presence demanding control. Next came Clara Hastings, a celebrated cosmetic surgeon draped in white, glowing like a starlet, though her smile masked ambition. Vanessa Bloom, an award-winning architect, arrived in a sleek black jumpsuit, surveying the mansion as if she already owned its blueprint. Olivia Kerr followed, a social media icon with millions of followers. In a scarlet dress and flawless curls, she posed as if the world's cameras were fixed on her. Finally, Isabella Cruz descended from the last car, her champagne gown shimmering, her diamond necklace blazing with quiet authority, daughter of a media empire. Emma's hands tightened around her cleaning cloth as she stood behind the glass, her breath shallow. The arrival of these women made her feel smaller, her presence erased by the brilliance of their wealth and beauty. Upstairs, Ethan hid behind his father's sleeve, his young face clouded with uncertainty. They're really staying with us, Dad?" he whispered. Richard's voice was firm, though tinged with the weight of doubt. "Yes, son, 30 days, and then you will choose one of them." The boy's fingers clutched tighter, as though hoping his father's sleeve could anchor him against what was to come. The butler's knock echoed at the door, ushering the women into the glittering hall where the chandelier glowed like a crown above them. The air was thick with performance. Sophia's voice cut through first, polished and confident. "Your home is magnificent, Richard. Truly impeccable taste." Clara's lips curved in a smile that was less warmth than weapon. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, where Emma passed with a tray of glasses. "Though perhaps," Clara murmured just loud enough to be overheard, "your staff could use a bit more grace." The comment, tossed like a stone into still water, sent ripples across the room. Emma's cheeks warmed, her grip steady but her heart unsteady. For in that moment, she understood. The 30 days ahead would test not just Ethan's choice, but the strength of her own place in this story. Emma steadied the tray as she stepped into the hall, her hands trembling from the weight of more than just the glasses. One slipped slightly as it landed, spilling a few drops across the glossy surface of the glass table. Olivia's laugh rang out, sharp and measured, her eyes cutting sideways to Sophia as she whispered with icy precision, "Well, a maid will always be just a maid." The insult fell like a stone into the silence. Ethan's small voice broke through, defiant and unafraid. "It's okay, Emma. I'll help you." He grabbed a napkin and pressed it over the spill, his little hands moving quickly, almost protectively. The 5 women exchanged glances, their painted smiles tightening into faint scowls. For the first time, Ethan's loyalty toward Emma had been exposed in plain view, and it unsettled them. Richard's voice rang out, breaking the tension like a gavel. "This is Emma Rivera. She has cared for this home for months, and I expect her to be treated with respect." Sophia arched an elegant brow, her lips curving into a smile that carried more edge than warmth. "Of course, Richard. We all want everything to be perfect, don't we?" The words were polite, but the room pulsed with quiet hostility. Emma lowered her eyes, clutching her cloth as though it were her shield. In that moment, she understood that the 30 days ahead would not just test Ethan. They would test her. The first mornings unfolded like a quiet war. The mansion, once serene, had turned into a stage where every glance was calculated and every misstep magnified. On the second day, Emma was polishing the grand wooden staircase when Vanessa strolled by, coffee cup in hand. With a flick of her wrist, dark drops splattered across the newly cleaned steps. "Oh dear," Vanessa said in a tone dripping with insincerity. "What an unfortunate mess. I suppose you'll have to scrub it all over again." Emma bent down to clean without protest, but Ethan, bounding down from upstairs, saw everything. His voice cracked through the air, sharper than expected. "You did it on purpose." The room stilled. Vanessa's chuckle was low as she crouched and patted his head. "Sweetheart, sometimes children missee things. Adults aren't clumsy like that." Ethan jerked back, shoving her hand away, and ran to Emma's side, his eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness far beyond his years. By the 3rd day, the games grew bolder. Clara Hastings carried a crystal vase into the living room, deliberately setting it at the edge of the table before pretending to stumble. The vase toppled, shattering across the floor, water soaking the rug. Clara turned sharply. "Be careful. I hadn't even set it down and you shook the whole table." Emma froze, stunned by the brazen lie. Olivia's voice chimed in, smooth and cutting. "Exactly. A house this grand deserves staff who know how to handle it." Just then Richard entered, his gaze darting between Emma kneeling to clean and Clara standing with perfect poise. "What happened here?" Clara's expression softened instantly, her tone slipping into practiced sweetness. "Nothing at all, Richard. Just a small accident." Suspicion flickered behind his eyes, but he said nothing more. Emma pressed her lips together and kept scrubbing, though her silence weighed heavily in the room. That afternoon, the 5 women gathered on the back terrace, sipping tea as if they were generals plotting in a war room. Their words dripped with strategies rather than sincerity. "I've arranged a trip to Disney World. Children always love it," Olivia bragged. Sophia leaned in, voice crisp. "Education is the foundation." I've already contacted the best private school in Manhattan. Vanessa smiled coolly. I could redesign his bedroom. A modern, sophisticated space would help him grow. Clara tilted her cup, eyes gleaming. Health comes first. I've booked consultations with the top pediatrician. Isabella simply shrugged, her tone laced with challenge. I bring media connections. Ethan deserves a mother who can open doors to his future. They spoke of gifts, status, and appearances, but not one of them mentioned what Emma quietly gave every day. Patient listening, laughter over paper animals, and the steady hand that eased the sadness in a grieving boy's eyes. At night, when the chandeliers dimmed and the mansion fell quiet, Richard began to notice unsettling truths. The women, radiant in his presence, wore their charm like a costume. But when Emma was with Ethan, the boy changed. He laughed freely, ran without hesitation, and filled the halls with life. One evening in the library, Richard leaned toward his son. What do you think of our guests? Ethan hesitated, his voice soft but certain. They're pretty. They give me things, but they're not like Emma. Richard's brow furrowed. Not like her? How so? Ethan bit his lip, his words trembling yet true. When you're around, they smile. But when you leave, they look at me differently. Emma's always the same. Silence pressed heavy in the library. Richard's hand tightened around his chair. The words of an 8-year-old had cut through the mask of appearances and struck at the doubt already brewing in his heart. By the 7th day, tension boiled over into spectacle. Emma was preparing lunch when raised voices pulled her into the hall. There stood Isabella, clutching an expensive gown, her voice sharp as glass. You ruined this. Tomato sauce on silk. Do you have any idea what this dress is worth? Emma froze. She hadn't touched it. All eyes turned toward her as Isabella's accusation rang out like a verdict. For Emma, it felt like the moment she had feared most, not a stumble in the shadows, but a public attack under the mansion's glittering light. And this time, she could not simply bow her head and remain unseen. Ethan's voice cracked through the hall like lightning. It wasn't Emma. I saw it. You dropped the plate yourself. The words, raw and unshaken, silenced the room. Isabella's cheeks flushed crimson, though she quickly masked it with a dismissive laugh. Children always imagine things, she said lightly, her tone soaked with disdain. Richard entered just then, his gaze sweeping the scene with sharp intensity. He said nothing, only instructed Emma to return to her work. But behind his composed silence, suspicion grew. He could feel the balance tipping, the truth straining against the polished smiles of the women he had invited into his home. That night, in the solitude of her small staff room, Emma stared at her, hands, skin dry and calloused from endless work. Her reflection in the tiny mirror whispered doubts she could not silence. Do I really belong here? She thought. Outside, laughter drifted down the hallway, the voices of the 5 women echoing like cruel reminders of the divide she could never cross. Just as the loneliness threatened to break her resolve, the door creaked open. Ethan stood there, clutching a paper crane, folded with his small, earnest fingers. Emma, I made this for you. Don't be sad, okay? I need you. Emma knelt, gathering him into her arms as tears slipped down her cheeks, falling on his shoulder. In that fragile embrace, she found strength. She could endure the coming storm, not for herself, but for him. The following Monday, the mansion's living room transformed into a battlefield of whispers. Beneath the chandelier's glittering light, the 5 women gathered, their smiles sharpened into masks of conspiracy. Sofia Delgado's voice was the first to cut through. Let's be honest, the boy's far too attached to Emma. If this continues, none of us stand a chance. Vanessa leaned against the sofa, smirking. Exactly. The moment she walks in, Ethan's face lights up. I've never seen a child so transparent with his feelings. Olivia swirled her wine, her sigh carrying irritation. She's just a maid, but he treats her like family. The boy doesn't know the difference between affection and service. Clara's lips curved into a sly smile. The problem is Richard sees it too. He may not say it, but his eyes betray him. Isabella flicked her hair back, her tone sharp as steel. Then the solution is simple. We remind Emma of her place. A servant doesn't compete with us. Their gazes met in agreement, a pact of silent malice sealed in the air. The next morning their plan began to unfold. As Emma finished polishing the marble floor, Vanessa strolled in, a small can of paint balanced in her hand. With exaggerated clumsiness, she stumbled and spilled it across the gleaming surface. "Oh dear, what a mess. Emma, clean it up," she said with mock sympathy. Emma's lips pressed together as she knelt, but Ethan, arriving at the scene, pointed with fierce conviction. "I saw you. You spilled it, not Emma." Vanessa crouched to meet his eyes, her smile venom masked as kindness. "Sweetheart, children sometimes imagine things." Emma shook her head softly, signaling Ethan to remain silent, though his fists clenched with defiance. Later that day, Clara entered the kitchen where Emma was preparing dinner. With a calculated slip, she dropped a jar of salt, sending crystals scattering across the floor. "How clumsy of me," she sighed, turning just as Richard walked in. "Perhaps your staff needs better training." Richard's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering, but he said nothing. Emma swept silently, the weight of accusation pressing heavy on her shoulders. That evening, in the privacy of their lounge, the 5 women circled again. Sophia tapped her pen against the table, her voice hard. "Small accidents won't be enough. We need something undeniable." Olivia leaned in, her smile wicked. "I have friends in the tabloids. If rumors spread that Emma is trying to seduce Richard, people will believe it." Isabella smirked, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Better still, hire a private investigator. We don't need real evidence, just a file, even if it's fake. Wealthy men despise scandal." Vanessa raised her glass, her tone cold. "Once her reputation is gone, Richard will have no reason to keep her." Clara's glass clinked with theirs, sealing their pact. "To our future," she said, as their laughter filled the room. Days later, a man in a crisp suit arrived at the mansion, introducing himself as a private investigator. "Mr. Collins, I have information on your employee, Emma Rivera." He handed Richard a thick folder. Inside were damning accusations, claims of theft, whispers of inappropriate behavior with children, records of supposed trouble in past households. Richard's brows furrowed. Some dates did not align. Some documents bore inconsistencies, but the weight of the allegations was heavy. He nodded silently, dismissing the man, but remained alone in his study, gripping the folder with a storm building in his chest. Lies were being spun, but by whose hand? Meanwhile, Emma felt the walls of the world closing in. On her way to the market, she noticed neighbors whispering as she passed. One woman even crossed the street to avoid her. At the checkout counter, the cashier forced a strained smile, eyes shadowed with judgment, as though scanning not groceries but a criminal. When she returned, Ethan ran into her arms, his small frame trembling. "Emma," he said in a breaking voice, "are they saying bad things about you? I heard someone call you a fraud." His words pierced her heart more than any rumor, and as she held him close, Emma knew the cruelty of the 30 days had taken a darker turn. No longer just whispers within the mansion, but poison spilling into the world outside. Emma swallowed hard, stroking Ethan's hair with a trembling hand. "Don't worry, sweetheart, they're only rumors," she whispered, her voice steady for his sake, though her heart twisted with fear. Inside, she knew the lies were spreading like wildfire, painting her as someone she had never been. By evening, the mansion echoed with the smug laughter of the 5 women. Sophia's smirk carried victory as she said, "High society never forgives a dirty past." Olivia, twirling her wine glass, added with a cruel chuckle. Tomorrow, the tabloids will run the story. By then, she'll be finished. Isabella leaned forward, her voice laced with sharp certainty. And Richard will have no choice but to pick one of us. The game is about to get interesting. Their glasses clinked together, sealing their alliance, while Emma remained unaware of the storm set to break over her head. That night, Richard sat alone in his study, the lamplight casting long shadows across the damning folder. Each accusation leapt off the page. Fired for theft, accused of inappropriate behavior, branded disrespectful to employers. His grip tightened until the paper crumpled. He reread the pages, and each detail rang hollow. The dates were mismatched, the signatures clumsy forgeries. For 4 months he had seen Emma care for Ethan with a patience money could never buy. He remembered evenings when she guided his son through homework, moments when her origami animals brought life to Ethan's quiet smiles, nights when she soothed the boy's tears for his late mother. If all that had been an act, she would rival the greatest actresses in Hollywood. His instincts told him otherwise. Emma's kindness was real. The next morning, Richard began making calls. One by one, he reached out to Emma's former employers. A mother of 2 spoke first, her voice breaking with warmth. Emma is an angel. She cared for my children for 2 years. We cried when she left. Another, a doctor, replied firmly. She worked in my clinic. Emma is one of the most honest, dedicated people I've ever known. Anyone who speaks against her is lying. 4, 5 more calls, all told the same story. Trustworthy, hard-working, gentle with children. Not a single complaint. Richard leaned back in his chair, his forehead damp with sweat. He whispered to himself, "These papers are forged." The truth was clear, and so was the enemy. That evening, walking the dim corridor, Richard paused near the living room. The women's voices drifted through the half-closed door. Vanessa's words curled like smoke. The rumors have spread everywhere. Soon Emma won't belong here. Olivia chuckled. Richard won't risk keeping a scandalous maid near his son. Sophia's voice was steady, dripping with superiority. That's the rule of our world. Once your reputation is stained, it's over. Richard's jaw tightened as heat surged through him. He had suspected, but now he knew. The women had orchestrated every rumor, every smear, every whisper designed to destroy Emma. He returned to his study, his mind heavy but sharpened with resolve. That night, Ethan knocked softly on his door. In his small hands was another paper crane, folded with shaky fingers. His voice trembled. "Dad, they said Emma's going to be sent away. Is it true?" Richard pulled him close, looking into his son's tearful eyes. "Son, I promise you Emma isn't going anywhere, but I need time to prove the truth." Ethan's small arms wrapped tightly around his father, clinging with trust. In that embrace, Richard knew the fight was no longer just about protecting Emma's honor. It was about safeguarding his son's faith in love, trust, and family. From that moment, Richard shifted his strategy. Rather than confronting the women directly, he would let them believe their schemes had worked. He would wear a mask of doubt, allowing them to grow careless, exposing themselves fully. That evening, during dinner, Richard set down his fork and spoke calmly, his words heavy with pretense. "I've been thinking. Perhaps you're right. Emma shouldn't be so close to Ethan." The air froze. Emma's hand faltered on the serving tray, her heart pierced by the words. Ethan's spoon clattered against the table, his young face etched with disbelief. Sophia's smile bloomed with triumph. "Richard, at last, you understand. Children need role models with education and status, not a housemaid." Emma bit her lip hard, lowering her gaze to hide the tears burning in her eyes. Ethan's voice rang out suddenly, sharp and trembling. "No, Emma isn't just a maid. She loves me." The room erupted in murmurs. Olivia leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake gentleness. "Ethan, sometimes adults must make choices for your good." Richard tapped his spoon against the table, his voice stern and commanding. "Ethan, sit down. This is an adult matter. But the boy stood taller, his voice breaking with desperation. I don't want a new mother. I only want Emma. His words shook the air like thunder. Emma turned her face away, unable to meet his gaze. That night, in her dim little room, she crumbled into sobs. To her, Richard's words had not been strategy, but betrayal. The man she had silently grown to respect had driven a blade into her heart, leaving her utterly broken. Emma sat in the dim light of her small room, her body trembling with silent sobs. She believed she had lost everything, her fragile place in the mansion, her bond with Richard, and the tender family she had built in her heart. When Ethan slipped into the room, his cheeks red and wet with tears, she pulled him into her arms. Emma, don't go, he pleaded, his small voice cracking. I don't need anyone else. I only need you. Emma's throat tightened. She whispered hoarsely, but your father has decided. Maybe I should leave. Ethan's arms wrapped tighter around her, his sobs tearing through the silence. If you go, I'll go too. Emma shook her head quickly, brushing his tears with trembling fingers. No, sweetheart, you must stay with your father. No matter what happens, you'll always have me here. She pressed his little hand against her heart. Right here, she told herself in the darkness. If this is my fate, I will accept it. But Ethan's love is real, and that can never be taken away. Just down the hall, the 5 women clinked their glasses in triumph, their voices echoing like poison. Vanessa's laugh rang out. Richard believes us now. Emma has no chance. Isabella smirked, her eyes gleaming with pride. At last, the maid knows her place. Clara whispered like a serpent. Now it's only us. One of us will be the next Mrs. Collins there. Laughter curled down the corridors, thick with victory. But they had no idea that Richard was listening, waiting, and quietly weaving the final act of his plan. The big night arrived. The Collins mansion blazed with light, its grand hall draped in white linens and fresh flowers. Dozens of guests poured in, friends, business partners, relatives, all eager to witness the climax of this strange month-long trial. Flashbulbs popped. Murmurs filled the air. In the kitchen, Emma steadied herself over a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her heart heavy as stone. Just finish this party, she whispered to herself. Then I'll leave quietly. She believed her story was ending. Meanwhile, the 5 women descended the staircase like royalty on a red carpet. Sophia dazzled in black velvet. Clara shimmered in silver. Vanessa commanded in fiery red. Olivia swept in ocean blue, and Isabella gleamed in gold. Their smiles glistened. Their eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. On the platform, Richard stood tall, Ethan by his side clutching his sleeve tightly. The boy's nervous eyes scanned the crowd, then turned to his father. Richard's voice carried through the grand hall. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day. I want to thank these 5 remarkable women for spending 30 days with my family. Applause thundered as the women lifted their heads high, basking in the moment. From afar, Emma's chest ached with every word. Richard continued, As promised, my son will make the choice, and as his father, I will respect his decision. Ethan's breath quivered, his small voice breaking the room. I don't choose anyone, I only want Emma. Gasps rippled across the hall. Heads turned to the boy, then to Emma, who stood frozen at the corner of the room. Sophia's heels clicked sharply as she rushed forward, seizing Ethan's hand. Ethan, darling, you're too young to understand. Emma isn't fit to be a mother. Ethan yanked free, his voice ringing louder. She's better than all of you. A storm of whispers swept through the guests. The tension was unbearable until Richard raised his hand. The room fell into silence. His voice cut through, deliberate and steady. Before a decision is made, I want everyone to see the truth. The lights dimmed. The screen above the stage flickered to life. One by one, images appeared like a cruel play unveiled. Vanessa tipping the paint with a sly grin. Clara nudging the vase to the ground. Olivia's lips curling as she sneered, "Just a maid." And the final blow. Sophia and Isabella's voices recorded in secret, whispering with glee. "The rumors have spread. Soon Emma will be gone." The hall froze. Shock swept across the faces of the guests. Gasps filled the air. The women's painted confidence crumbled, their faces drained of color. Richard stepped forward, his voice low yet powerful. "This is the truth. For 30 days, it was not Emma who caused trouble. It was them. Plotting, scheming, even hiring a fake investigator to destroy her name." He held up the forged folder. "I spoke to every family Emma has worked for. All of them confirmed she is honest, hardworking, and loves children." Murmurs filled the hall, anger mixing with disbelief. Ethan broke free from the stage, running to Emma. He clung to her tightly, his voice piercing the silence. "I want Emma to be my mom. I don't want anyone else." Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks as she trembled, looking at Richard. He walked toward her slowly, the hall holding its breath. Taking her hand firmly, his voice resonated. "Emma Rivera, you haven't only brought joy to my son, you've reminded me of what truly matters." Then, to the shock of all, Richard knelt down on one knee. From his pocket, he revealed a small velvet box. Inside, a ring sparkled under the chandelier's glow. "Will you marry me and be Ethan's mother?" The hall fell silent. Emma covered her mouth, her tears flowing freely. Ethan gripped her hand, his voice urgent and joyful. "Say yes, Emma." Her voice broke, trembling yet certain. "Yes, yes, I will." The room erupted in applause. For Emma, the maid who had been treated as invisible, it was not just a proposal. It was a miracle, a truth finally revealed, a love she never expected, and a family she thought she had lost forever, restored before all the world. Thunderous applause shook the great hall of the Collins mansion, rolling through the chandeliers and down the gilded walls. Some guests dabbed at their eyes, moved by what they had witnessed. Others whispered in awe, marveling at the courage of a child and the quiet strength of a maid who had become more than anyone expected. In sharp contrast, the 5 women, once radiant with confidence, were now pale, their faces tight with humiliation. Heads lowered, they slipped out beneath the weight of scornful stares, their jeweled gowns rustling like broken pride. On the stage, Richard pulled Emma and Ethan into his embrace, his voice cracking as he said, "Our family is finally whole." In that moment, the story of lies collapsed, and something genuine took its place. By dawn the next day, the truth blazed across New York. The same tabloids that had smeared Emma now plastered Richard's video across their covers. Headlines no longer whispered scandal. They shouted betrayal, exposing the disgrace of the 5 women. Sophia was suspended from her law firm, her clients vanishing overnight. Clara's practice emptied, her patients unwilling to place their trust in someone so cruel. Vanessa lost her most lucrative design contract, her bold reputation unraveling in silence. Olivia's millions of followers dwindled by half, branding her a fraud. Isabella, once a darling of media circles, found herself disowned by her own family. Once they walked with pride, but now all that remained was disgrace and ruin. Meanwhile, the Collins mansion brimmed with laughter. Richard and Emma's wedding was not extravagant, but it was heartfelt. Ethan, carrying the rings with pride, flashed the brightest smile of his life. As Emma walked down the aisle in her pure white gown, her presence radiated belonging. No longer a servant, but the heart of the family. 2 years passed in a blur of joy and growth. In the mansion's sunlit garden, Emma sat on a bench with a baby girl cradled in her arms. Sophia Collins, named not after betrayal but after redemption. Ethan, now 10, ran in circles across the grass, his laughter carrying in the breeze before stopping to hug his little sister tightly. Richard approached, his steps slow and content, an arm sliding around Emma's shoulders. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Emma's smile was radiant, happier than I've ever been. The wind lifted blossoms from the garden, scattering them like blessings over their heads. A family that had once lived in shadow was now bathed in light. By the 5th year, the Collins mansion had transformed into a home filled with warmth. In the garden, golden sunlight stretched across the wide green lawn. Emma sat beneath a tree with Sophia, now 5 years old, her bright eyes sparkling like her father's. At her feet, a 3-year-old boy, Gabriel, dug his hands into the soil, laughing without a care. Ethan, taller now at 13, kicked a ball across the yard, his frame lean but strong. Yet even with his growing height and maturing voice, he never lost the gentle smile Emma had first given back to him. "Careful, Gabriel," Ethan called with a laugh, steadying his little brother before he toppled over. From the porch, Richard stepped down carrying a basket of fresh fruit, pausing to drink in the sight before him. Once he had drowned in loneliness, the weight of fatherhood pressing hard against him. Now he had everything, an honest, whole family stitched together by love. Emma glanced up as he approached, her smile luminous. "See, Richard, we've come a long way." He sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "And I've never been more grateful for life than I am now." The past still lingered in whispers. Sometimes the names of the 5 women surfaced in news columns, but only as a cautionary tale. They had faded into obscurity, their legacy swallowed by disgrace. To the Collins family, they were nothing more than shadows, proof that deceit never outlasts truth. For Ethan, now a teenager, Emma's presence had become more than comfort. In his private journal, his handwriting revealed a depth beyond his years. "Mom, Emma didn't just save Dad and me from loneliness. She taught me that real love isn't something money can buy. It's what you give with your heart, even when no one's watching." That evening, the family gathered at the garden table, the air filled with laughter and the scent of fresh blossoms. Sophia chattered about her kindergarten teacher. Gabriel banged his spoon rhythmically against the wood, sending everyone into peals of laughter. Richard lifted his glass, his eyes warm as they moved from face to face. "Here's to us," he said. 5 years ago, people thought this family could never be whole. But today, we have everything." Emma raised her glass, her voice steady. "It wasn't luck. It was love and trust." Ethan chimed in, his young voice resolute. "And never giving up on each other." Laughter rang out once more, Sophia clapping while Gabriel echoed with delight. The Collins mansion was no longer a monument of wealth tainted by schemes. It had become a sanctuary of joy, a symbol of resilience, and proof that even in the darkest storms, love could prevail. What began as a story of lies ended with the simplest, purest truth. Love, real and unshakable, always triumphs.